When I first heard about Red Spire, it was a ghost story whispered around campfires. A ghost town lost deep within Crimson Canyon, they said. Abandoned building swallowed by the sandstone cliffs. The echo of its name lingering like a warning on the wind. I'd spent years chasing stories like these, uncovering legends, piecing together truths, but nothing could have prepared me for what I'd find there. My journey began with an old journal I stumbled upon at an estate sale. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. Inside, scrawled in shaky handwriting, with a fragmented account of one of the miners who had stumbled into that cursed canyon in the 1930s. His words spoke of greed, desperation, and terror beyond comprehension. They also provided a rough map, leading straight to the ceremonial cave. It was all the incentive I needed. I arrived at Crimson Canyon on a cold, overcast afternoon, the kind of day where shadows stretched long and thin, as if the earth itself recoiled from the light. Red Spire wasn't on any official maps, but the journal's directions were precise enough to lead me to its forgotten streets. The ghost town was little more than a scattering of decayed wooden buildings, their skeletal remains bowing under the weight of decades. The air was eerily still, and the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt road felt deafening. As I stood there, staring at the ruins, I felt it. The canyon seemed to breathe, to hum with an unseen energy. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though the town was lifeless. A distant gust of wind carried a low, almost human wail, but I told myself it was just the wind winding through the cliffs. I wasn't here for the town, though the journal had pointed me towards something far more intriguing, the ceremonial cave. It lay hidden deep within the canyon walls, far from the town itself. By the time I reached the entrance, the sun was sinking low, casting everything in shades of crimson and shadow. The cave was exactly as the journal described, its entrance marked by faded red symbols that seemed to pulse in the waning light. Warnings, I presumed, though I didn't understand the language. But the air grew colder as I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The artifacts within were astonishing. Clay pots filled with dried herbs, stone carvings depicting animals and figures I couldn't recognize, and patterns of red paint stretched across the walls in intricate designs. It was as if I had stepped back in time, into a sacred place untouched for centuries. But among these treasures were unmistakable signs of disturbance, broken pottery, shattered seals. It was clear that someone, perhaps those desperate miners, had violated this place. I felt a pang of unease as I moved further into the cave. The journal had mentioned cryptic warnings painted in red, and now I stood before them. My flashlight revealed symbols I couldn't decipher, but the sensation they stirred was unmistakable. Dread. Beneath the symbols lay an ancient altar, and surrounding it were streaks of a dark, rust-colored stain. Blood, dried and forgotten, but not erased. That's when the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind funneling through the cave's jagged walls. But the sounds grew more distinct, murmurs in a language I couldn't comprehend, layered with something deeper, guttural, almost growling. The air grew heavier, pressing down on my chest. The shadows on the walls seemed to dance, flickering in my flashlight's beam, though the flame hadn't moved. I backed away, my heart pounding, but it was too late. Something had noticed me. The first sign of its presence was a cold, a bone-deep chill that seeped into my skin. My breath fogged in the air, though outside it was a mild autumn evening. Then came the sound of footsteps, echoing from deeper within the cave. But when I turned my flashlight in the direction of the noise, the beam illuminated nothing but emptiness. I wasn't alone anymore. Desperation clawed at me as I turned and stumbled back toward the entrance. The whispers rose into a crescendo, mingling with the sound of my own ragged breathing. The walls themselves seemed to shift, narrowing as if trying to trap me. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and then died completely. In the suffocating darkness, I ran. I don't know how I made it out of that cave, but I emerged gasping for air, my hands trembling as I clutched the journal. The sun had set completely by now, the canyon bathed in the silvery glow of the moon. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. As I made my way back to Red Spire, the whispers followed me. They were fainter now, almost teasing but unmistakable. My footsteps seemed to echo louder than they should have, and the shadows stretched impossibly long, reaching for me like skeletal fingers. I passed through the ghost town's crumbling main street, but something had changed. The buildings seemed more intact, more vibrant, as if the town itself had come alive under the moonlight. And then I saw them. Figures moved among the ruins, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. Shadowy, indistinct, but unmistakably human. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. One by one, they turned toward me, their faces hidden in shadow but their intent clear. They were the miners. I was sure of it. The ones who had broken the seals, unleashed the curse. Now they were bound to this place, their souls twisted into something monstrous. I ran, not caring which direction, just away from them. But the canyon itself seemed to conspire against me. The paths I had taken earlier were gone, replaced by jagged rocks and sheer cliffs. My heart raced as I realized the truth. The canyon wasn't going to let me leave. I don't know how long I wandered. Time lost all meaning as the whispers and shadows toyed with me, leading me in circles. My flashlight was useless, its dead weight swinging in my hand. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. Finally, I found myself back at the ceremonial cave. The entrance yawned before me like a mouth waiting to devour its prey. I didn't want to go inside, but the canyon left me no choice. The shadows behind me closed in, herding me forward. My legs moved on their own, each step heavier than the last. As I crossed the threshold, the whispers fell silent. The cave was exactly as I had left it, and yet it felt different, watchful, aware. The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the walls glowed faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. And then I saw them. The miners stood around the altar, their forms flickering and distorted, their faces hollowed by despair. One of them raised a hand, pointing directly at me. "You shouldn't have come," a voice rasped. It wasn't the wind this time. The shadows closed in, and the last thing I saw was the altar, glowing with otherworldly light. I realized, too late, that I had become part of the legend, a warning for the next soul foolish enough to disturb the Crimson Canyon. Now, I'm here wherever here is. I don't know if I'm alive or dead, but I feel the canyon's pull, its endless hunger. The shadows are my only companions, and the whispers never stop. If you're reading this, turn back. Leave Red Spire and its secrets buried. Some curses should never be awakened. It began innocently enough. I had spent years as a historian, researching obscure events and forgotten tragedies. My name is Clara Morrow, and I pride myself on uncovering truths buried beneath the sands of time. When I first heard of Blackwater Manor, its dark reputation intrigued me. An isolated mansion, the scene of a fiery tragedy on a snowy Friday the 13th in December 1926. 42 souls lost in a blaze, their deaths shrouded in whispers of betrayal and greed. The manor had become an obsession, and I was determined to unearth its secrets. The journey to Blackwater Hollow was treacherous. A biting winter wind howled as I navigated the snow-covered path leading to the ruins of a manor. Even in its dilapidated state, the structure was imposing, a shadowy monolith against the pale, overcast sky. The remnants of the once grand estate seemed to exude a palpable unease, as if the air itself mourned for the souls lost here nearly a century ago. As I stepped through the crumbling archway into what remained of the grand hall, the first thing that struck me was a silence. It was an oppressive, unnatural quiet, as though the world itself held its breath. I could almost hear the faint strains of a ghostly orchestra, the whispers of a bygone era lingering in the corners of my mind. I had come prepared, armed with notebooks, a camera, and my ever-present curiosity. But as I began to explore the manor, an inexplicable heaviness settled over me. The air grew colder, each breath forming frosty clouds before dissipating into the gloom. The stories of that fateful night were as vivid in my mind as if I had been there myself. Lord Richard Blackwell, a wealthy and ambitious aristocrat, had thrown a grand ball to celebrate the completion of his manor. It was said that the fire began in the ballroom, sparked by faulty wiring. The guests, trapped by the rapidly spreading flames, cried out for help. But instead of aiding them, Blackwell fled to his study, desperate to secure the fortune he had hidden in a safe. His betrayal sealed their fate, and the manor collapsed in a fiery inferno. The first sign that I was not alone came as I stood in the remnants of the ballroom. My flashlight flickered, casting fleeting shadows on the walls. Then I heard it, a faint rustling, like the swish of silk gowns and the shuffle of dancing feet. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my imagination. But when I turned to leave, I saw them. Figures shimmered in the gloom, their forms translucent yet vivid. Men and women dressed in elegant 1920s attire moved in perfect synchronicity, dancing to an unheard melody. Their faces were pale, their expressions vacant, but their eyes seemed to hold a terrible sadness. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The ghosts paid me no mind, continuing their spectral waltz as if unaware of my presence. I wanted to flee, but something rooted me in place, a strange compulsion to understand what I was witnessing. As I watched one of the apparitions, a woman in a crimson gown, broke away from the others. She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes burning with intensity that sent chills down my spine. She spoke without moving her lips, her voice a whisper that echoed in my mind. "Find the truth," she implored. "Free us." The words sent a shiver through me, but before I could respond, the vision faded. The ballroom was empty once more, the oppressive silence returning like a shroud. I knew then that leaving was not an option. The spirits were trapped, their anguish tethered to betrayal of their host. Lord Blackwell's greed had condemned them, and now they sought justice, or perhaps redemption. Driven by a newfound determination, I made my way to the study. The room was surprisingly intact, the walls still adorned with charred fragments of once opulent wallpaper. In the corner stood a heavy, rusted safe. This, I realized, was what Blackwell had died protecting. The air in the room grew colder as I approached the safe. My hands trembled as I turned the dial, the mechanism groaning in protest. With a final click, the door swung open, revealing a pile of scorched papers and a small, ornate box. Inside the box was a ledger, its pages filled with numbers and names. It didn't take long to understand its significance. Blackwell had embezzled funds from his guests, exploiting their trust to amass his wealth. The fire, I realized, was no accident. It had been a desperate act to cover his tracks, his greed quite literally consuming everyone around him. As I pieced together the truth, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it became a cacophony of whispers. The ghosts had returned, their faces contorted with anguish. I held up the ledger, shouting over the din, "I know what he did. He betrayed you all." The whispers ceased, replaced by a profound stillness. The ghostly figures stared at me, their eyes filled not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it was almost unbearable. One by one, they began to fade, their forms dissolving into the ether. The woman in the crimson gown was the last to go. She lingered for a moment, her expression one of gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice a soft echo. When she disappeared, the room seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting. But as I made my way back to the ballroom, I realized that the curse had not been entirely lifted. The shadows of Blackwater Manor still loomed, the memory of that night forever etched into its walls. I left the manor with the ledger in hand, vowing to share the truth of what had happened. The world needed to know of Blackwell's betrayal, to honor the lives lost in the flames. Yet, even now, I cannot shake the feeling that the manor is watching, waiting. The weight of its history presses on me, a constant reminder that some truths come at a price. And sometimes the past refuses to let go.